Former Harvard University professor asked to avoid prison time for his ties to the Chinese regime. China takes on American books as tensions sour. Beijing and Moscow are cooperating to build new breeder reactor next to Taiwan. Blank paper movement's witness exposes the Chinese regime's suppression.
Former Harvard University professor Charles Lieber has asked a federal judge in Massachusetts to spare him from jail after he was convicted in 2021 of allegedly lying about his involvement with the Chinese Communist Party CCP's program. His lawyer, Mark McCasey, asked the judge for one of four possible sentences, ranging from 1 year probation to a sentence of 6 months at home detention, to be followed by a year of supervised release. A federal jury convicted the former chair of Harvard University's Chemistry and Chemical Biology Department in 2021 for lying to federal authorities about his ties with the CCP's Thousand Talents program at a Chinese university. He also was convicted for failing to report income from this university and for a false income tax return. China's Thousand Talents program is a prominent talent recruitment plan designed to attract, recruit, and cultivate overseas researchers to further scientific development, economic prosperity, and national security for the CCP regime. According to the U.S. Justice Department, Lieber became a strategic scientist at Wuhan University of Technology and later participated in China's Thousand Talents program from 2012 to 2015. During the 3-year contract period, Wuhan University of Technology paid him $50,000 monthly and $150,000 in living expenses. In addition, Lieber received more than $1.5 million to establish a research lab at the university. Federal prosecutors still need to provide their recommendations. Charles Lieber is due to be sentenced on April 26th. According to a report titled Threats to the U.S. Research Enterprise from the U.S. State Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, China designed the Thousand Talents plan to recruit 2,000 high-quality overseas talents, including scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, and finance experts. The plan provides salaries, research funding, lab space, and other incentives to lure experts into researching for China. The report noted, by 2017, China dramatically exceeded its recruitment goal, having recruited more than 7,000 high-end professionals, including several Nobel laureates. The FBI and China's Thousand Talents programs incentivize its members to steal foreign technologies needed to advance China's national, military, and economic goals. As U.S.-China tension escalates, China lashes out at American literature by stifling releases. According to the Financial Times, only 1,960 titles labeled by Chinese regulators as U.S.-themed books were published last year. Compared to the 4,213 figure recorded in 2018, the number has shrunk by more than half. A former editor at China's top nonfiction publisher, Sci-Tech Press Group, CPG, said the government first targeted U.S. books in 2019 when the U.S.-China trade war began. At the time, its propaganda department did not grant publishing approval to U.S. tomes for 6 months. Beforehand, American books were flying off the shelves in China. James Wu, a Beijing-based publisher who used to work for CPG, said approvals were granted to nearly all U.S. titles on the New York Times bestseller list in the 2010s. Wu said there was so much interest in best-selling American authors that CPG was willing to pay advances worth tens of thousands of copies. The unnamed former CPG editor said Chinese regulators are waiting at least 2 months to consider authorization of U.S.-themed writings. Compared to books from other countries, the delay is 4 times longer. The Chinese government has not outlined its categories either. Denials have been slammed on a wide range of American literature. Besides obvious topics, such as political and cultural ones, that Beijing deems embracing Western values, even fictional books or those authored by Chinese nationals can be targeted. A Shanghai-based scholar who remains anonymous said mainland publishers had rejected his technical writings about the U.S. financial services industry. The person said domestic publishers still said no for fear the regulator might not like U.S.-related topics. Book editors said the vague red line let the propaganda department target more titles. Such risks and uncertainties are making publishers reduce their release of U.S. titles, the former CPG editor said. Meanwhile, CPG is also promoting books critical of the U.S., a tendency that the Financial Times said began in 2019. At that time, Chinese officers gave their thumbs up to a book named The American Trap, authored by ex-Alstom executive Frédéric Pierucci, who had a history of corruption. Publisher Wu said, "That book is a milestone in collaboration between the authority and publishers when it comes to U.S. titles." The Chinese Communist Party CCP regime is starting construction of a new breeder reactor right next to Taiwan, something the Pentagon has been concerned with for some time. The Pentagon has expressed concern that Beijing and Moscow might cooperate to expand both countries' nuclear arsenals. According to the New York Times report on April 20th, the CCP is taking the first steps toward developing a new breeder reactor in Fujian County's Changbiao Island. It is one of two fast neutron-generating reactors under construction at the site, which is only 135 miles, 217 kilometers from Taiwan. Popular Mechanics reported that Rosattom, Russia's state corporation, would provide the materials for the new breeder reactor. Rosattom is said to have delivered 25 tons of highly enriched uranium to get China's new breeder reactor up and running. The delivery is part of a long-term and extensive cooperation plan that the two companies of China and Russia have committed to each other. According to Taiwan News, in 2022, the Pentagon raised concerns in a policy document that in the 2030s, the United States will, for the first time in history, face two major nuclear powers as strategic competitors and potential adversaries. The CCP has always maintained that it builds breeder reactors entirely for civilian purposes. However, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy, Jeff M. Plum, shared with the U.S. Congress that there's no getting around the fact that breeder reactors are plutonium, and plutonium is for weapons. He added, "This matches our concerns about China's increased expansion of its nuclear forces as well because you need more plutonium for more weapons."
Huang Yicheng, a Shanghai man living in Hamburg, Germany, recently accepted interviews with several media, speaking about his personal experience participating in the blank paper movement. He called on Western countries to be friends of the Chinese people, not friends of the Chinese Communist Party. He hoped the international community would continue paying attention to the freedom fighters. Although police are harassing his parents, he believes the ones who should be afraid are those who suppress us. Huang is 26 years old and studying for a master's degree in Hamburg. According to Reuters, Huang joined the blank paper movement near downtown Shanghai's Wulumuqi Road on November 27th last year to protest against the Chinese government's brutal zero-COVID policy. He recounted that evening, around 400 to 500 protesters gathered, chanting slogans and holding blank sheets of paper. But after nightfall, police started violently arresting protesters. He said, "A group of police officers rushed forward and pinned me to the ground, punching and kicking me. Then they grabbed me upside down and dragged me along the ground. My chin was bleeding profusely. I lost my glasses and shoes." He then sat near a police bus full of other detained protesters. There, he witnessed police slapping and beating several female protesters, and he managed to sneak out unnoticed amid the chaos. On the street, Huang bumped into an acquaintance who led him to a safe place away from the protest site, where he caught a taxi home. Huang said, fortunately, his name had not been recorded by the police. After the protest ended, Huang kept a low profile and lived in extreme fear of arrest while waiting for his student visa to Germany. He finally left China in late March without being contacted by the police. According to reports, many protesters kept silent after the blank paper movement for fear of retribution. Huang was one of the first protesters to reveal their identities. Huang said, "I feel I need to speak up for Cao Jixin and other detained protesters. I would like to call on more international forces to pay attention to them and Chinese citizens who are fighting for freedom." Earlier in an interview with RFI, Huang said he fully knows the dangers of speaking out. Many overseas Chinese who spoke out about the blank paper movement on Twitter were harassed, and also their parents in China were targeted. However, after careful consideration, he still decided to reveal his identity. He said, "I also hope to be able to use this way to inspire many overseas Chinese to stand up for the resistance movement in China. The second point is, I think about my friends in China who are being imprisoned. When I was studying at Peking University, many of my classmates such as Yue Xin disappeared. They may have paid with their lives fighting for freedom, so if I escaped but remained silent for the rest of my life, I would be tormented with a conscience. Now I ventured to stand up and speak out for the blank paper movement." He pointed out the Chinese regime wanted to ignore the incident. "If we forget this, that's exactly what they want, so we can't forget. We must keep in mind and always remember the blank paper movement. Remember our friends in prison, remember the the protesters who fought with us. He hoped Western countries could become friends of the Chinese people, not friends of the CCP, and should not help the CCP suppress the Chinese people's resistance. On April 18th, Huang revealed on Twitter that police threatened his parents in Shanghai. He also told RTI that if he told the truth, the CCP would definitely attack his family. However, he will continue to speak up and not be silent, and he is determined to fight. Huang emphasized it is difficult for Chinese people to speak the truth, and only a few dare to do that. As a result, those who speak up are susceptible to severe punishment. As long as everyone dares to stand up and speak up, the Chinese regime's ability to maintain stability will be limited. When we stand up, we will not be afraid. It is they, the CCP, who should be afraid. Those who oppress us are the ones who should be afraid.